I have one more major video besides my upcoming Q&A planned for before the end of the year, which I'm really going to have to haul on to get done.
I'm coming to make an announcement. Shadow the Hedgehog's a bitch-ass motherfucker. He pissed on my fucking wife. That's right. He took his hedgehog out
Please,
and he pissed on my
Okay,
wife.
okay, I get it. Just,
And I
I'll
said,
do
that's
it. Just give me a
disgusting.
second.
So I'm making a call-out post on my Twitter.com.
You're disgusting.
So, you might recall that in early 2019, I made a retrospective video concerning my thoughts, feelings, and general reflections on the first Sonic adventure for the Sega Dreamcast. It's roughly a year later now, and I think that it's time that I gave its sequel, Sonic Adventure 2, a similar look. One thing I want to go ahead and get out of the way though, just because several people on that original video and my recent videos seem to miss out on one key component of my essays. These are not reviews. I cannot tell you how many people comment on my videos complaining that my reviews are biased or not completely impartial, and it's frustrating given that it's never been my intention to be a middle-of-the-road or completely objective review type of channel. This channel is, for the most part, purely about my opinions, my perspective, and using examples to explain my thought process. Sure, I may make recommendations based upon my opinions, but at the end of the day, that's all they are, my opinions, which you're free to disagree with. Can we all agree to keep that in mind?
The answer is yes and no.
Oh Jesus, okay, fine, let's just carry on. Sonic Adventure 2 is the sequel to Sonic Adventure, a Dreamcast title released worldwide on June 23rd, 2001. The 10-year anniversary title for the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Expectations for a sequel to the first Sonic Adventure were pretty excitable, considering the generally positive reception of it for the time. But tensions were abound as its release was shortly after the discontinuation of the Dreamcast console, and Sega's announcement that they would be withdrawing themselves from the console market. This left the future of Sonic, nigh Sega itself, to be uncertain for a time as this game was rolling out onto shelves. And though Sonic Adventure 2 would prove to be far from the final installment in the series, you have to understand that, for the time, it did have a sense of strange finality to it. Before we go into all that, though, let's start where any great story begins, that is to say, the beginning. A portion of Sonic Team, led by director of Sonic Adventure Takashi Iizuka, flew to the United States and set up in San Francisco, California. Not only were they in the hometown of Sega of America, but they were also in the city where the Sega Technical Institute once flourished, pumping out some of the most successful 16-bit Sonic games ever created. They called themselves Sonic Team USA and got to work on their first major assignment, the localization for the Western release of the first Sonic adventure. Yeah, do you think I meant 2 yet? No, we still got a little bit to go. They cleaned up a fair amount of major bugs that had been visible blemishes on the initial Japanese release of the game, as well as tweaking other bits and pieces until the product was much more solid and durable to Western gamer scrutiny. For the time. While the Western portion of Sonic Team focused on Sonic projects, Yuji Naka and the Japanese-based team were working on Phantasy Star Online. When work was finished on the localization of SA1, naturally work began on the much-anticipated Sonic Adventure 2. From the very beginning, the team decided to take what successes the first adventure had and strengthen them, putting a laser focus on what aspects worked over which ones received the most complaints. One of the biggest points of contention, however, was story. The first Sonic Adventure was the first game in the series to receive a focus on narrative, with an emphasis on more cutscenes than ever before, in particular with the addition of full voice acting for the very first time in the series. The seeds were planted for a new story involving new characters, with one of Iizuka's earliest ideas being the concept of a dark Sonic. Originally, this dark hedgehog was referred to as Terios, derived from the Japanese verb terasu, which means to compare with. However, later, the name was changed to the much simpler Shadow the Hedgehog, as the name perfectly encapsulated Iizuka's vision for the character. The other new character for this game was Rouge the Bat, who in early development was referred to as Nails. It was established early on that she should be working as a spy in the game's plot, and that her true allegiance and intentions would be mostly obscured throughout the narrative. The ability to control Dr. Eggman for the first time was also very important for the team, with the gameplay style of Sonic Adventure's E102 Gamma being recycled for mech-styled shooting levels featuring the Mad Doctor himself.
That's right, this is what you get! My super laser piss!
While Knuckles and Rouge would be handed a similar style of gameplay to Knuckles' own treasure hunting stages from SA1. The team took a lot of inspiration from their new base of operations and the local area for the settings of the game, with much of it being designed around San Francisco. The team even included an Easter egg in City Escape as a nod of revenge for the trouble they endured with parking fees.
So we had cars, but sometimes we'd get a little careless, and every so often, we'd get hit with parking tickets. And they were what, about $30 or so? Anyhow, there were these little cars that would go around passing out the parking tickets. And these people were just doing their job. But still, every single time we'd get a parking ticket, we'd be thinking, there goes another $30. So, in one of the stages of the game, this little car shows up, and Sonic can attack it and just destroy it. It's like, all right, revenge. We were doing little things like that.
In May of 2000, rumors were abound with the release of very few screenshots and a brief trailer. Though excitement was clear, the audience seemed vocal about their concern regarding the supposed absence of Tails. Further clarification would wait until September 22nd, when the Sonic Team Fall Festival began on SonicTeam.com. For 10 days in a row, new screenshots were posted to the website to eager fans desperate for more information. Sonic's grinding, Eggman's playable status, and cryptic hints regarding the nature of the game's story were all posted with little clarification to supplement it all. Supposedly, the teasing for Shadow might have continued longer, however due to an accidental leak by toy company Resource, which ironically didn't even release their tie-in toys before going bankrupt, Shadow and Rouge were both officially shown off in April of 2001. Tails was also announced to be playable, with similar mech stages to Eggman, with word after the fact suggesting that he was a late addition to the game due to fear of fan backlash if he wasn't playable. In addition, Sega announced a deal they had made with Soap Shoes to advertise their grinding shoes in the game, as Sonic would be able to grind for the very first time in said game. The partnership was a no-brainer, and it also gave gamers a slim period of time with which to actually purchase a pair of their own official Sonic shoes. Sonic's grinding would go on to feature in future games, however the Soap brand tie-in was only included in this one. Even subsequent re-releases of the game tend to remove the Soap graphics included in the Dreamcast release. When the game finally released, it hit shelves on June 23rd of 2001, the 10th anniversary of the franchise. A special edition, dubbed the Sonic Adventure 2 Birthday Pack, came with a special fold-out packaging which included a music CD, a history book, and a golden coin with Sonic's image etched onto it. The game was developed over a period of 18 months and was said to be more focused on action than its predecessor. And to a degree, I would say that definitely checks out. What was the result then? Well, let's step back for a second. Though I don't have as much of a loaded history to describe with SA2 as I did with SA1, I will say there is at least some to be shared. I got Sonic Adventure 2 probably the year of its release, actually. Back then, I was a bit too young to understand the whole development and release process, or even the fact that Sega was going under. I just remember walking through the sliding doors of a Blockbuster Video, gee, that's an old sentence, and laying eyes on a copy sitting on the shelf of purchasable games, because, yeah, back then Blockbuster apparently sold things too, I guess. It was around the same time that I had played Sonic Adventure 1 to completion, and I was incredibly psyched to try the newest game in the series. Though much of the game's more action-packed elements intimidated me when I was young, I eventually buckled down and started to work through the game. It felt much more brazen, much more adventurous than the previous outing I had spent so many hours foraging through. In a way, it felt like a truly bigger experience, though I would come years later to actually believe its predecessor was the more expansive of the two, at least when it came to explorative level design. Back then, though, what you have to understand is that due to my rather lacking video game skill and the extent to which I could stay up or even waste time on video games, Sonic Adventure 2 took me a while to complete fully for the first time, and well, it was definitely a transformative experience for me at the time. Arguably, I would say SA1 made a much bigger overall impact on me when I played it, but SA2 was nothing if not incredibly awe-inspiring to my child mind. This was helped in no small part due to the increasingly dramatic storyline, but, well, as with last time, I'd like to focus more on the gameplay side of things before I actually go into the story itself, especially because my opinions on the story are probably somewhat controversially complimentary given the state of discourse surrounding this game's writing in the modern era, although I will agree the cutscene presentation is just as hilariously bad as it's ever been. Sonic Adventure 2 is presented gameplay-wise in a much simpler fashion than the prior game in the series. While SA1 presented 6 playable characters, all with their own unique playstyles, and a final story segment available upon completing all of them, SA2 only has you contend with 3 campaigns, and 3 playstyles total. The first 2 campaigns are available from the start, Hero or Dark. The Hero story will put you in control of, well, the heroes of the story, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. While the Dark story will give you the opportunity to play as the bad guys, Shadow, Dr. Eggman, and Rouge. The decision is yours to save the world or conquer it, though inevitably both paths will lead you to the same converging endpoint. Upon completing both the Hero and Dark stories, the final story segment is unlocked, presenting a conclusion to the game where both sides must team up for the greater good. Now, you may be asking yourself, how is it only 3 playstyles if there are still 6 playable characters? Well, my friends, that's an excellent question, and one that is simply answered as well. And that's because each campaign employs the same 3 playstyles among matching sets of characters. Sonic and Shadow are speed-type characters, racing through mostly linear levels littered with rings, loops, enemies, and so on, with the focus of simply finishing the stage as quickly as possible and reaching the goal ring. Tails and Eggman are put in control of Gamma-styled mechs, tasked with a slightly more methodical trudge through similarly linear stages, albeit with much more of an emphasis on combat and giant explosions. Simply reaching the goal ring is again your ultimate goal in these stages. And then there's Knuckles and Rouge, who go on treasure hunts to find 3 hidden shards of the Master Emerald, similarly to how Knuckles operated in Sonic Adventure 1, with several differences, but we'll get to them. Let's start with Sonic and Shadow stages. These stages are easily my favorite part of the game, and mainly what I'll be playing if I'm revisiting this game's stage select. Sonic has a healthy chunk of stages himself, though I'd prefer if he had more, clocking in with 6 of the 16 stages in the Hero story. Shadow, on the other hand, gets a much flimsier hand of cards, only getting 4 stages total out of the 14 stages in the Dark story. Combined, their gameplay style composes 10 of the game's overall 30 stages, not counting the extra Green Hill stage unlocked after attaining all A ranks for the game's various missions and emblems and so on. While you might think to yourself at first that this seems relatively fair, considering that that's about a third of the stages in a game with 3 playstyles, you'll find yourself wishing these stages were a bit more disproportionate in Sonic's and Shadow's favor later on. Anyway, these speed stages, as I'll refer to them from now on, emphasize, of course, platforming and action. Sonic and Shadow will jump, spin dash, homing attack, grind, somersault, and do various other things to proceed through the level, avoid and destroy enemies, and make it to the goal ring at the end of the stage. While I don't hate more linear level design inherently, I have to say I'm in the camp of people who find the level design to be a bit more underwhelming here than for Sonic stages in SA1. While those stages could feel a bit wide at times for first-time players, they really seem to incentivize exploration more upon repeat playthroughs for me. In SA2, there's hardly many occasions where I'm really given much reason or opportunity to approach different ways of looking at progression. And for me, even though I enjoy the levels themselves, they just give me less of a reason to want to replay them. At least, as often, anyway. That being said, however, Sonic and Shadow still control just about how you would expect them to, and there are even tweaks here which I greatly prefer to the days of SA1. For starters, grinding is a very fun new addition to the formula, and for seemingly this game only, actually manages to include a sense of realism in regards to balance. In Sonic Adventure 2, grinding on a rail is fairly by the numbers, but there is a bit more nuance to it than simply jumping on and waiting to hop off. In SA2, you have to maintain your balance to keep the pace going, tilting your body in rhythm with the direction of the rail and so on to keep yourself upright and preventing awkward pace-breaking stutters. While I know some might argue this is unnecessary and obtrusive to the flow of gameplay, I never really had that much of an issue with it and found it to be another small element of management that I could enjoy about the gameplay, or at the very least manage to spice it up. In subsequent Sonic games where grinding is much more one note, I find it's not nearly as satisfying to perform as in SA2, because in SA2 it actually feels like you're rewarded for being able to do it well. In addition, the Lightspeed Dash makes a return as an addition to Sonic's arsenal, and it's seen a much-needed improvement here. While in the previous game, Sonic needed to charge a Spin Dash in order to ready the Lightspeed Dash, or shorten the wait time with the Crystal Ring, this game features a dash which is activated at the simple tap of a button. Thank God. The charge-up time in SA1 isn't that bad, of course, but it's definitely much more convenient to just be able to tap the button and get a move on. It at least breaks the pace much less than before. However, this is met with some difficulty given the introduction of the Bounce Bracelet power-up. The Bounce Bracelet itself, don't get me wrong, is a very fun addition, and honestly is something I'm disappointed hasn't made more of a return in later games. It allows Sonic to, well, bounce in place, and though it tends to kill his forward momentum at times, it can net you some pretty serious height if you play your cards right. Unfortunately, the Bounce Bracelet is hampered by one irritating issue that the game just couldn't be bothered to address, and that's button assignment. In Sonic Adventure 2, most if not all of your context-specific actions are mapped to the action button, with the commands typically changing depending on what context you're faced with in gameplay. This is a fine enough concept on its own, but when you start getting detection and hits involved, it becomes a bit of a chore. And it's not necessarily terrible at registering the different things you need to do, per se, but even just one folly can easily cost you a life, and that can be frustrating. Particularly in instances where you need to jump and light dash along a trail of rings suspended over a bottomless pit. The control has a bad habit of failing to register the dash as an available action, and instead choosing to use the Bounce Bracelet, rocketing you straight downward into the bottomless abyss and earning you an instant death. To be fair, during my recording of the game for this video, this didn't happen to me often, but it was annoying when it did, and I can imagine that someone who's new to the game and doesn't have as much experience tiptoeing around the sometimes wonky controls would have a worse time with it. Thankfully, at the very least, this only seems to apply to Sonic, as Shadow doesn't even have a Bounce Bracelet upgrade. Is it because he'd be able to cheese the Bio-Lizard fight that way? Anyway. I also find the control here compared to Adventure 1's to be a bit less floaty and loose. Some would argue this is better, that the added precision and tightness makes for an overall better experience, but I, on the other hand, tend to prefer the formers. Sonic's jumps in the previous game felt a bit easier and more forgiving for me to control in that game, and still felt as though he had reasonable momentum despite also obeying button inputs generally on a dime. He feels a bit gimped, I guess is how I'd put it, and while in a general sense he doesn't feel bad to control, I'd say he doesn't control as satisfyingly to me here as he does in SA1. Similarly, while it's still fun to use the spin dash, specifically for strategic jumps, it feels much less powerful in this game than in the last. Some argue that the spin dash in SA1 is so powerful that it's a bit too exploitable, and to a degree I understand where they're coming from. With mastery of the SA1 spin dash, you can make insane level skips in no time at all, but to me that was part of the fun of it. Most first-time players, after all, would have no inclination or idea of how to use the spin dash to that kind of advantage, and most who would know are seasoned players who've replayed the stages and experimented with their approach over a period of time. Getting good at exploiting the powerful spin dash felt like a reward for mastery of the controls and good performance. While here, I don't know, it just doesn't feel as good to use. It's still pretty good, but still held back. Of course, I don't mean to bag too hard on the stages. They're certainly not bad, and I honestly still replay them pretty often. I just wish that they'd been a bit more like Sonic's final stage in design elements than, say, Green Jungle or Crazy Gadget. Tails and Eggman, on the other hand, I am much more conflicted about. Let me say up front that I don't think these mech stages are anywhere close to the worst that this series has to offer in terms of playstyles. They're perfectly serviceable stages, but that's also about as much as I can say for them. I definitely prefer Gamma's style of shooting gameplay from SA1, as while Gamma felt a bit more hectic, he also felt a bit more fluid to control to me, and the mayhem of his stages tended to keep things feeling at the very least engaging. The mechs, however, are very clunky, which isn't a terribly new observation. While I definitely disagree that the walkers are so clunky that they ruin the playstyle, they're definitely a bit stiffer than they could have been. And this does tend to make precision platforming, especially along moving platforms, a bit irritating when you miss the corner, fall into the sand, and die for the millionth time.
How do you like that, Obama? I pissed on the moon, you idiot!
Thankfully, stage completion is still the only goal in these stages, though, and they're not particularly that long. In fact, Cosmic Wall, one of Eggman's later stages in the Dark Story, is one of my favorite stages in the game, outside of the speed stages, because of its floatier jumps and gravity-based hover gimmick. It made use of the mechanics inherent to the playstyle in interesting and fun ways, which I really wish had been implemented more in the overall roster of mech stages in general. The mechs also have a life bar, which can be bolstered by acquiring more rings, which will also prevent you from dying if you're hit with no rings, unlike the other characters. This will probably be the most important to you in brief boss encounters with these mechs, however they won't really help you much there. The boss fights as Tails and Eggman are, to put it bluntly, angering. While the first encounter on Prison Island isn't too terribly hard, the second on the arc is almost constantly plagued with your opponent character firing a gigantic laser that takes up half the room, knocks off half of your health, and tends to turn faster than you can move your clunky-ass metal feet. In short, prepare to yell expletives as this encounter kills you more times than is necessarily enjoyable. I wouldn't call it a hard encounter per se, but it's definitely annoying. And generally, that's kind of how I felt about the whole playstyle in general, albeit a bit more watered down maybe. It's not too hard, it's generally fine, but at the end of the day, it's also not what I'd call especially fun, and can get pretty grating. And that leaves us with the final of 3 playstyles, Knuckles and Rouge, who, boy, I'm sure if you even have a tangential knowledge of this game, you've heard people say plenty about these treasure hunting stages. In recent years, I've seen more and more people come to their defense, and I do get it. Criticism of them, and this game in particular, tends to be very rare in approaching nuance, and very much tends to parrot certain talking points over and over and over again. But I'll be honest, guys, I came back into this game with the intention to simply engage with everything on an even playing field and objective set of eyes, and I just couldn't muster a defense for these stages. But Nezumi, you said Knuckles' playstyle in SA1 was pretty good. This game's playstyle for the treasure hunting is practically identical. Yes, that is true, and yes, I did say that, but this game does have several important differences with its emerald hunting that need to be taken into consideration when talking about it. Firstly, the maps. While Knuckles' maps in SA1 could be fairly expansive to a degree, they were always also self-contained, with most of them always being fairly boxed in. In SA2, the treasure hunting maps are massive, and while this isn't inherently a problem, the tediousness of this design decision starts to compound with some of the others made alongside it. For example, you might start to notice while playing these stages that they start to get pretty damn long. And that's for a reason. You see, in Sonic Adventure 2, the emerald radar at the bottom of the screen would light up in varying shades leading up to red, indicating your proximity to an emerald piece. In SA2, this is largely the same, aside from one major difference, and that's that in the former, all 3 pieces could be detected simultaneously. In SA2, it only tracks 1 piece at a time, and this means that you could be directly beside one of the shards, but the game will not tell you that it's there unless it's the shard that it wants you to look for at the moment. I've heard people defend this by saying that if the radar was the same as in SA1, these stages would be too easy. But come on now, what's more important? Arbitrary stipulations enforced to stretch out playtime, or stages that don't irritate me to the point of wanting to rip my own hair out? And the worst of it really comes out in Meteor Herd, and especially Mad Space. God, Mad Space is horrible. It's easily among the worst of the worst when it comes to 3D Sonic stages, and yes, I do say that knowing that Sonic 06 exists. And geez, don't get me started on the hint system. Yes, I know that Tikal was a bit too handholdy in SA1 when it came to these, as she literally just flew in the direction of a shard, but these hint monitors stray too far in the opposite direction most of the time, with a lot of their advice being nearly incoherent if you don't already know what they're getting at. Honestly, it's just impossible for me to enjoy these stages, and believe me, I've tried to, but I just don't. I find a bit more enjoyment from these when I enable a cheat that fixes the radar, but that's not something that I can credit to the game, really. If I need to enable a cheat code to make the base game more enjoyable to play, then the base game itself has an issue. Oh, also, Security Hall is completely horrible and it sucks, and if I could use the Chaos Emeralds to go back in time, I would excise it from the final product by any means necessary, including force. Lastly, we need to mention 2 other portions of the gameplay experience as well: kart driving and the Chow Garden. Let's start with the former. It sucks. Moving on, the Chow Garden is basically a virtual pet simulator. Similar to the Sane Garden from SA1, this package includes a much more polished and cutesy muffin baby raising experience than ever before. Like in SA1 before it, animals can be collected from stages and given to your Chow to increase their particular abilities and traits, as well as the new Chaos Drives, which will further emphasize growth in a specific statistic. In this game as well, Chow can be raised into a variety of differing evolutions, with character-based appearances, elemental appearances, and the most common, of course, hero and dark-based Chow, evolved depending on whether you raise it primarily with hero or dark characters. Upon evolving one of each, you can also unlock 2 alternate gardens, the hero and dark gardens respectively. I know people out there who say that the Chow Garden is the feature of this game that they've spent the most amount of time on, and that it's practically the thing they enjoy most about it. While these days I can't really find the drive to spend hours upon hours in the gardens anymore, and I do prefer most of the main game content to mulling around within it, I do understand the sentiment. As a child, I spent hours upon hours in the Chow Gardens and became very attached to the little creatures I was helping to raise. This, of course, is in no small part due to how darn adorable they are. I'm serious. Prepare yourself for some major diabetes when these things come to adore you, because they're so sweet they genuinely make me cry sometimes. The best way to experience the Chow Garden, in my opinion, though, is organically, interspersed throughout your playthrough of the main story. While you can visit the garden at any time via stage select once you've been to it once, you're generally encouraged to visit by picking up Chow keys located in blue crates in each stage. If you collect the key, you automatically visit the garden upon completing the stage, and when you exit the garden, you return back to the story mode in progress. In this sense, it makes the garden feel like a reprieve from the main adventure, and a nice way to spend your time decompressing and generally letting your heart flutter at the tiny children. Playing the Chow Garden afterward, however, well, I know some people enjoy it, but for me it just becomes a bit too monotonous without anything else to liven it up. There are, of course, Chow races and karate that you can enter your Chow into in order to win prizes and raise their stats, but while it's a fun distraction, it's a bit bare bones and definitely not something you'll want to spend too much time on in long, uninterrupted sittings. In short, the Chow Garden is an adorable time sink for those of you who love virtual pet simulators, but you'll find that it's best consumed in conjunction with more substance. And if you don't care for that sort of thing at all, then you're probably not going to get much out of it. Jeez, I've seemed pretty negative about this game so far, haven't I? Don't get me wrong, I want to emphasize again that I do like this game, and it's a very important game from my childhood. In fact, despite my overall preference for SA1, I have to admit I probably put far more hours into SA2 than its predecessor overall, and that might come across as somewhat confusing to some of you. Why would this game stick out so much compared to its senior when I clearly don't seem to prefer its gameplay? Well, my friends, you might have guessed that my feelings for this game are a great deal more complicated than many others, and you'd be right to guess so. And to fully explain why that is, we need to take a step aside. We need to talk about more than just the gameplay. We need to finally talk about the story of Sonic Adventure 2. Due to the fact that the story is told somewhat out of order, with several events from the hero story being shed more light on in the dark story and vice versa, I'm going to interweave the two in chronological order when doing this plot synopsis, at least as best as I can. The story begins with who's gonna win, knowing the danger that lies within. Aboard the Ark, a genius at heart, wanting to unlock the mysteries of oh wait, damn it, that's the Eggman theme lyrics. Let me try. The story begins with Dr. Eggman infiltrating the military base of Prison Island. After learning of a secret weapon from the diary of his late grandfather, Professor Gerald Robotnik, he inserts a Chaos Emerald into the terminal, releasing said weapon. A black hedgehog named Shadow, who proclaims himself to be the ultimate life form. He offers to help Eggman conquer the world, instructing him to come to the abandoned space colony known as the Ark with more Chaos Emeralds. Shadow proceeds to Central City, stealing an emerald while evading the military's forces. Shadow is vowed to fulfill a promise to a girl named Maria, which he insists is based upon revenge, and encounters Sonic, who has been captured and blamed for Shadow's crimes. After a brief confrontation, Shadow escapes, leaving Sonic to be captured by the military yet again and hauled off to Prison Island. Meanwhile, Knuckles encounters Rouge and Eggman, who both try stealing the Master Emerald. He stops them by shattering the emerald, allowing its pieces to scatter so he can retrieve them on his own. You might have guessed that this seems to be a convenient way of shoehorning Knuckles into the plot, and the answer is yes, that's exactly what it is. There's pretty much no other reason for Knuckles to be here, other than for a plot thing that he has to do later. Anywho, Rouge, spying on behalf of the government, heads to Eggman's base and the Ark. While there, Shadow shows Eggman the Eclipse Cannon, a super weapon aboard the Ark created by Gerald, which he says can be charged with Chaos Emeralds and used to effectively hold the world hostage. Rouge reveals herself to them, offering a Chaos Emerald to gain their trust and join the team, to which Eggman reluctantly accepts. Tails and Amy infiltrate Gun's Island base to rescue Sonic, while Eggman, Shadow, and Rouge collect emeralds on the island. Eggman makes a global broadcast announcing his intention to fire the Eclipse Cannon at the Earth in 24 hours if his demands are not met, demonstrating its power by blowing up half of the moon. This mysteriously does not cause the tides to drastically shift and kill millions. Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Knuckles use the emerald they've collected to track the others to the space colony, infiltrating Eggman's base and boarding one of his spaceships to hitch a ride to it. Knuckles' shards are spilled out of the cargo bay along the way, leading him to leave mid-flight to collect them in nearby space, and he also fights Rouge there, and they both decide to have the worst levels in the entire game. On board the Ark, Tails reveals to Sonic that he's crafted a counterfeit Chaos Emerald with a similar wavelength and properties in order to sabotage the Eclipse Cannon. As Sonic is about to use it, Eggman tells him over the intercom that he's captured Tails and Amy, forcing him to return to rescue them by bargaining the emerald in exchange. Sonic tries to trick Eggman with the fake emerald, but Eggman traps him inside of an escape pod rigged with explosives. Eggman insists that he knows that the emerald is fake, but as it turns out, this was just a ploy to get Tails to reveal whether it was or not. After he says the fake emerald wouldn't fool him, Tails asks how he knew, and, well... With confirmation from Tails in hand, Eggman ejects Sonic into space as he presumably explodes. Thinking that Sonic is dead and left with Sonic's request to handle the rest, Tails stands up to fight Eggman on his own, defeating the Doctor in the process. Sonic, meanwhile, uses the power of the fake emerald to barely use Chaos Control, an ability he observed Shadow utilizing before to teleport back to the colony. He's intercepted by Shadow on his way to the cannon, but manages to defeat him and destroy it. Eggman sneaks away while Tails and Amy are distracted by Sonic's message confirming to them that he's still alive. However, he finds that when trying to put the last emerald into the cannon, it doesn't fire. The colony instead begins to fall, playing a pre-recorded message from Gerald, seemingly recorded directly prior to his execution via firing squad. Oof. In the video, Gerald reveals that he's programmed the colony to collide with Earth if the emeralds were collected there, which would in turn destroy the planet as an act of revenge for the government condemning his research and killing his colleagues, which led to the death of his diseased granddaughter Maria, whom he had been researching the concept of an ultimate life form for specifically in order to attempt to cure her primary immunodeficiency syndrome, a rare and ultimately fatal disease. Realizing that their only hope to prevent the planet from being destroyed is to work together, Sonic and friends join up with Eggman and Rouge to lead an assault on the cannon's core, to neutralize the Ark using the Master Emerald as a conduit to stop the Chaos Emeralds.
That's why Knuckles had to be here.
At first, Shadow refuses to participate, thinking his purpose to be completed and plan to be fulfilled properly. However, after Amy pleads for his help, her words coincide with those that Maria had said to him all those years ago as she helped Shadow to escape in a pod directly prior to her fatal shooting at the hands of a gun soldier. Realizing that Maria's request was never for revenge, but instead to help mankind, Shadow tearfully dashes off to catch up with the others, arriving just as Sonic and Knuckles get to the core and encounter the Bio-Lizard, a prototype of the ultimate life form made prior to Shadow. Shadow distracts it while Sonic and Knuckles hurry to the Emerald Shrine replica inside of the core, using the Master Emerald to neutralize the Chaos Emeralds. Though their attempts appear successful, the Bio-Lizard uses Chaos Control to fuse with the cannon, manually continuing to pull the colony along on its collision course. With no other options left, Sonic and Shadow utilize the Chaos Emeralds to transform into their super forms and wage one last attack on the prototype in space. They manage to defeat the beast, using Chaos Control to teleport the Ark back into stable orbit. However, this depletes the last bit of Shadow's strength as he plummets to Earth, content in fulfilling his promise to Maria, but ultimately having been implied to have died. You know, until he got popular and they brought him back in future games. The people of Earth celebrate as Sonic returns to the Ark, sadly confirming Shadow's demise as all of the heroes disperse, returning home as Sonic bids Shadow a final farewell in his lonesome aboard the Ark before leaving, thus ending Sonic Adventure 2. So, how about them plot holes, right? What? There were clearly tons of them, right? Well, actually, about that. This story, let me tell you, is one of the biggest contention points of this entire game for some people. And honestly, I get it. My thoughts on it have fluctuated wildly over the years, from thinking it was awesome, to thinking it actually made no sense, to then coming back around on it. For many people, the plot flaws seem obvious, and to a degree, I can see where they're coming from. Some of the conveyance in the actual cutscenes is not so great, especially considering cutscene presentation is pretty subpar. And the dialogue syncing isn't even properly done in English. But would you believe me if I said that this game doesn't really have many plot holes? Certainly not as many as you might think. And what little remains are hardly anything that disrupts the story so seriously as to render it impossible to believe. I know, however, that if I don't explain, it will be hard for people to believe me. People are basically programmed to assume at this point that SA2's story is incoherent garbage, so I guess it's just my job to set the record straight. A lot of these points were also made by Kanjin in his video about SA2, but I just do want to note that I noticed these things before he made that video, so I just, I never made a video about the game until now, so yeah, I'm not a thief. 1. Why does the military mistake Sonic for Shadow? To put it simply, they don't. Project Shadow is a controversial subject for Gun, for a multitude of reasons, but not the least of which being that the very creature the project was centered around is part of their reasoning for condemning Gerald's research and killing everyone aboard the space colony. If word got out as to what they did 50 years ago, it would be a PR nightmare. Forget PR nightmare, it would be an atrocity. No telling how harshly that would disrupt government and political affairs. The public, being generally unaware of Shadow, needs to be fed a cover story, and what better cover story for a hedgehog committing crimes than by simply blaming the only other hedgehog the world's aware of, Sonic, who will have most certainly gotten some street cred due to his defeat of Perfect Chaos in Station Square in SA1. You might claim that I'm giving Sonic Team too much credit, but remember that Shadow even suggests that Sonic is a scapegoat in the Japanese dialogue for the recap of Radical Highway in the Dark Story. Simply put, the government lied to keep secrets, the public fell for it. Bing bang boom. 2. Why does Amy say she caught a ride with Tails when she was at Prison Island before him? Remember that Amy is saying this after they've gotten into the heavily secured base, close enough to be right at Sonic's prison cell. While getting to the building is definitely difficult in its own right, getting inside is another matter entirely. When Amy says she hitched a ride with Tails, I always took this more to mean that she followed along as Tails cleared out the base, in his first shooting stage. Because of Tails clearing the base out, Amy was able to safely follow along and get access to Sonic's cell when she otherwise would have been severely outnumbered and outmatched. 3. How did Shadow come to the conclusion that Maria wanted revenge on the entire planet? This much I'm surprised that people miss, because it's pretty much directly stated. In Gerald's diary, it's directly implied that Gerald had the ability to tamper with Shadow's memories. He could have directly tampered with Shadow's memories to imply revenge as Maria's wish, rather than helping humanity. If you wonder how he could have done so with Shadow being on Prison Island, it's because he himself was also on Prison Island, as you can tell by his notes being all over Sonic's prison cell. It's his former prison cell. As for how he got out long enough to tamper with Shadow, well, we can only really assume that he found a way. Can't answer them all. 4. Why doesn't Rouge just take the 6 emeralds? If she's working for the government, it's in her best interest, so what's stopping her? Simply put, the cannon is already confirmed to be capable of firing regardless. It has 6 emeralds worth of energy, and the only thing affected now by the emeralds is the speed at which it charges. If Rouge left the emeralds then, where would she go? To Earth, where the cannon could fire directly at it at any time? Furthermore, at around the same time, we see that she knows someone is trying to destroy the cannon with the fake emerald. It's pretty much her safer option to stay put for the time being. 5. Why was Gerald's death threat uploaded to the Ark? If Gunn knew about the Eclipse Cannon, why didn't they do anything about it in the past 50 years? Gerald's execution tape was most likely taken to the Ark by Shadow, whose memories had already been manipulated by Gerald for his benefit prior with regards to Maria's wishes. Remember that before Eggman even goes to the Ark in the Dark Story, Shadow goes there before him, and he's alone for a good bit. This gives him the perfect window of time to do this. As for the Eclipse Cannon, I wouldn't blame Gunn for being a bit lost on what to do with it. They probably figure nobody will ever bother bringing the Chaos Emeralds to it because they lack the knowledge of its existence or the circumstances with which to activate it. They didn't count on Eggman showing up with his mysterious diary of riddles. Also, who knows if trying to destroy it would lead to shrapnel, metal, or any other dangerous things falling down onto the planet. It's a really hard decision to make. 6. If Gerald's life and research was to benefit mankind, why would he have programmed the Ark to be capable of crashing into the planet once all 7 emeralds were put into the cannon? Was this before or after Maria's death? He didn't. It was his intention to do so, but the plan wasn't actually put into motion until Shadow awoke 50 years later after being released by Eggman. Simply put, Gerald's reprogramming of Shadow was both for the intention of manipulating his memories and setting this chain of events into motion, compelling Shadow to bring the execution tape to the Ark, and then use Gerald's plans to reprogram the Ark as needed. It's as Shadow says later when Amy is pleading with him, he has no reason to help because as far as he's concerned, everything is going according to plan. We know that he can't be talking about Eggman's plan here because Eggman is very obviously opposed to the planet being crashed into, and is actively assisting in the plan to stop this from happening. So what plan is Shadow referring to? Gerald's plan, the plan he helped set into motion in place of Gerald who could not do it himself, and reprogrammed Shadow specifically for the day in the future where he would be awoken and do this. 7. If Rouge works for Gunn, why does she need to look for emeralds in Security Hall? Didn't they give her orders to spy on Eggman? Why didn't she just tell them who she was when she was trapped? Rouge does not work for Gunn. She works directly for the President. Though later games would go on to imply her more direct connection with the military, this game makes no such mention, only calling her a government spy. There are instances in the plot's timeline as well where Rouge steps out from Eggman and Shadow's meetings, only for the same point in the hero story to have the president getting a call from an agent mentioned by his secretary.
We're receiving an incoming signal from our agent.
Gunn wouldn't have been the ones to order Rouge to tail Eggman and gather intel anyway, considering Eggman's stages wherein he's returning to his pyramid base has him being attacked by Gunn robots who clearly want him dead. If Rouge were simply tasked with acquiring information about the guy's operation, then why would her bosses kill the guy they wanted information on? Simply put, the government is working independently of the goals of the military, and Rouge's boss is the president, not Gunn. If she revealed her position in Security Hall, she could have risked her ability to get information from Eggman, or even worse, Gunn could have considered her a liability, killed her, and been wise to the president's concerns. A total failure for everybody involved. 8. How did Sonic use Chaos Control using the fake Emerald just by watching Shadow use it once? This one's a bit more of a leap, but I hope you'll go with me. Sonic has always been adept at controlling chaos energy extremely well, to the point where his mastery of his super form is nearly unparalleled. Tails and Knuckles have done similarly before, but in comparison to Sonic, they're clearly not as powerful when it comes to that. Sonic is also no stranger to teleporting, as we can see from special stages in any of the classic games. With similar wavelength and properties and his mastery of chaos energy, Sonic was able to narrowly manage chaos control, which, while a little ass-pulley, still makes sense if you think about it. 9. Why is Shadow a hedgehog if the prototype is a giant lizard? Scientific research is all about experimentation. It wouldn't be surprising if Gerald used plenty of different animals along the way of his research, eventually happening on Shadow. Perhaps he realized that for some reason this hedgehog form was closer to the mastery of chaos energy that he was hoping for. After all, it's the defining feature of Shadow's abilities, right? So that must have something to do with it. So that must have something to do with what Gerald was hoping the ultimate life form would be capable of. It's for this reason as well that while as close as he is to the real thing, Shadow is still unable to maintain his super form long enough to get back to the colony in the final boss encounter. If you spend a long time in the final boss, one of Shadow's dialogue lines to Sonic implies he may even realize that Sonic is the true ultimate life form.
Sonic, I think I've discovered what the ultimate life form is. It might be you.
The very end product that Shadow should have been, but fell just slightly short of actually encompassing. 10. Hey, why didn't the gun commander who had a grudge against Shadow notice that Sonic wasn't Shadow either? Because when this game was made, he didn't exist yet, okay? Let me live! Whew. Okay, that was a lot to go through. Hopefully it gives you a greater appreciation for this story though, because being honest, upon retrospect and with these things in mind, I honestly think SA2 is one of the strongest Sonic stories to date. Sure, I have a bit more of a sentimentality for SA1's story, partly because it was much more personally impactful of a game to me, and there are just things about it that I prefer, not even just talking about gameplay. But if nothing else, I cannot for a second imply that as a kid, this story didn't absolutely captivate me. It has its flaws, sure. Even the amount of hole patching I just did can't fix every gripe that people have with it. But I think what it lacks in polish, it definitely makes up for in ambition, style, and heart. Sonic Team USA wanted to make a grander story than they ever had before with this game, and honestly, it really shows. Is it a bit too grimdark for its own good? Maybe. But I think the words of IDW Sonic writer Ian Flynn really apply here. Of course the premise is ridiculous, it's a blue cartoon hedgehog who goes really fast. But if you don't take everything too seriously yourself, but instead allow the characters to take their own world seriously because they live in it and experience it, your audience will be able to care and take it seriously too. Sonic Adventure 2, for as serious as it tries to be at times, is pretty over the top in ways I would hope any self-respecting writer would realize when putting ink to paper. But because the characters care, because they realize the stakes and care about what happens to their world as a result, I do too. I did too. Playing Sonic Adventure 2 as a kid was a very formative and adventurous experience for me. Standing behind the characters that I'd grown to adore throughout my entire childhood thus far, and seeing them pitted up against what was arguably a very dark story for someone as young as I was to be consuming. But through it all, the bright, colorful characters I loved made the adventure exciting and palatable, and even though things became scary at times, I could always believe that they'd be able to save the day and make things right. I felt for their struggles. I felt for Shadow. I learned what it was like to see characters in a story not as simply good or bad, but somewhere in between. People with flaws, who made mistakes and came out on the other side as better, more compassionate people. But most of all, I think what Sonic Adventure 2 offers to its players above anything else then and now is a sense of legacy. The 10th anniversary title for Sonic, milestone to be sure. 10 years, that's pretty impressive for any franchise, even if it has gone on to live much longer than that. Sonic had already accomplished so much by that time, and even then it was hard to imagine what the future of the series would look like, if it would even come to fruition. As we all know, due to hindsight, Sonic wasn't nearly done yet, but back then, with Sega receding to the background, with the Dreamcast waving goodbye to its grave, there was a sense of ambiguity when it came to where Sonic would go from here. Legacy was ingrained into its very background and seeped all the way down into its substance. The legacy of Gerald Robotnik passed down to his grandson, unable to fully commit to the atrocities his grandfather had planned. The mission of Gerald carried like a torch by Shadow, who only realized later that he had been manipulated. The dark secrets of Gun that they tried so hard to cover up out of fear for a creature they committed atrocities just to suppress, only to have their lives saved by that very creature in the end, at the expense of his own life. The will of Sonic being passed down to Tails as, for a brief moment, Sonic ensures that the fight will continue even if he dies, because he trusts his best friend to be able to finish what he started. And of course, the commitment of Sonic to fight another day for the fallen hero who sacrificed everything to keep the rest of them going, who could rest easy as the curtain fell on another grand adventure. And even still, there's more than I could conceivably cover here. The stories of not just me and my experiences playing this game exhaustively as a kid, what that meant to me, what enjoyment I was able to derive from it back before I was as critical or cynical of it as I am now. There's also the story of all the kids whose first Sonic game was this one. And that was a lot of kids, believe it or not, because shortly after Sega went under, their first third-party project was a port of Sonic Adventure 2 to the Nintendo GameCube. A first for the series, and the first opportunity for many a Nintendo kid to get their hands on a Sonic game, creating a new generation of fans who love the Blue Hedgehog and would for years to come. I can't tell you how many friends I had as a kid who had never touched a Sonic game in their lives until the GameCube port of SA2 came out, and they loved it. There was nothing else like it. And that's why, for me, even though I know this game is flawed, and even though I don't really even like it as much now as I did when I was younger, I still appreciate what this game stands for me, for so many other people too, and what diamonds it managed to offer, even if obscured by a little rough. Playing SA2 for the first time nowadays is something I would only really recommend with a bit of caution. It's certainly aged a bit poorly in many regards since its initial release, and some of its elements, judging by this video, I'm sure you can tell are a bit polarizing. However, if you absolutely insist on doing so, there are several ways you can give it a spin. There's of course always the GameCube port, which is easily found for cheap, as well as a downloadable version on PS3 and Xbox 360 if you have either. My preferred method of play, however, is the Steam port on PC, because it provides mod support, which allows me to fix the Emerald radar, and cool new textures, and even have Shadow make mac and cheese. And nobody can stop! There's also two mods I find to be absolutely indispensable for witnessing this game's story and being able to take the cutscenes as seriously as can be reasonably achieved. And that's the retranslated and fixed sound mixing mods. Fun fact about the sound mixing on the HD re-release of SA2,
I came here following the signal from the Emerald. If I'm not mistaken, this is the Master Emerald, is it not? Dr. Eggman.
it's garbage. The music is deafeningly loud a lot of times, whereas dialogue is way too quiet. The sound mixing mod evens out the levels perfectly, and makes everything much easier to parse. As for the retranslated mod, it retranslates all of the subtitles to be a more faithful translation of the original Japanese script, meaning you can play with the Japanese audio track with accurate lip sync and everything, and read a translation of the script that's much closer to what was originally intended, along with voice acting which is arguably of a much higher quality.
お状況の悪いハリネズミめやはり生きておったのかあんなもんよりナックルスの動かすシャトルの方がよっぽどスレナンだったぜ
何
わしが手に入れたじいさんの日記じゃ抑えるものソワ混沌滑るもの頼むマスターエメラルドカオスエメラルドを止めてくれ
But hey, that's just my preference. There's plenty of mods to explore out there, and trust me, it's just a game that deserves to be modded for improvement at this point. Or you can play it vanilla. I mean, that's your choice to make too. Who am I to tell you how to live your life? Regardless, I hope you enjoyed my little look back on this game, this little diatribe of memories, compliments, and complaints alike. Apologies if it was a bit disjointed, but I had a lot to say, and obviously my feelings about this game are far more conflicted than they were for SA1. Also, hey, is it just me, or does the final story preview in this game actually kind of resemble the episode previews in Evangelion? That's just a stray thought that I didn't really have anywhere else to put. You know, thinking about it, it'd be kind of cool if I did an episode preview type thing like that too, wouldn't it? I mean, I am taking a short break from making videos after making these 2 monstrous videos I just made, so it would be a perfect way to let people know what I'm gonna be up to in the meantime, right? Yeah, I think I'm gonna do something just like that.